biogeographers. We're going to get into maps and mapping today. It's going to be more technical than like in my cultural class. We get into the social side of this stuff, but today we're going to get into the mechanics, the nuts and bolts of how mapping works, which is actually much more complicated than most of us expect or assume before you actually start studying this stuff. Making a map seems relatively straightforward, but I'm going to get into the fact that actually a lot of it is amazing. That we can not only do it, but we do it with an incredible amount of accuracy. So we'll get into some basics of that, but I also want to discuss a little bit about, when we say map, what is it that we're actually talking about? This is the image that goes into my mind when I hear the word map. It's something usually, it's printed out on paper. I think mainly just because I'm an old man, I tend to think of, kind of older maps, something that is from the past and not something that's, very modern or, looking toward the future. But honestly, this kind of stuff here, that's not just what a map is. And I realize too, for a lot of you listening to this, you're, young enough to where actually using a map, it may have never happened in your life, which is mind blowing. To old people like myself, but it's it's something we also who are teaching this need to remind ourselves of. So we'll get into kind of this old school kind of stuff, but we'll also be looking toward how this still connects with more modern things, digital mapping, whether it's getting into your phone and using Google Maps to tell you how to get from point A to point B, using something a little cooler like Google Earth is pretty cool stuff here, free. You can download it. You can do an incredible amount of stuff with it, but it requires a basic foundational knowledge of maps and mapping and cartography and all this stuff that I'm going to be getting into, or at least I'm going to introduce some very basic stuff here. We don't have time to get into every single aspect of this stuff, but it's important to know what's going on with this stuff. We tend to, I think, if we get free software, some kind of app, whatever, that's free, you can download it, you kind of click around. With a lot of these things, they've been designed to kind of appear to be as simple and straightforward as possible, and so we tend to not think much about it. But honestly, if you don't know what you're doing here, if you don't have that underlying foundation of how this stuff works, you can make horrible choices. You can get, answers that make no sense, and you won't even pay attention to that stuff. So that's one reason why I get into this stuff and spend time talking to you guys about it. Right? It's important to at least know what we don't know, so you have a little more respect for this stuff as you move forward. Another thing that I want to start this off with, is to show how powerful maps can be, and spatial reasoning and analysis and all that. Just how great it is to be a geographer and what you can do with that. And the example I use here is a study that came out. It was published, I want to say it was in 2009, out of UCLA, and it's where these two geographers, Tom Gillespie and John Agnew, decided to scientifically find Osama Bin Laden. And now to go back in time, and again, some of you guys are young, this will be kind of fuzzy to you, but we had 9/11 take place, right? Back in 2001. It's determined that it's Osama Bin Laden is behind this horrible attack. We want to find him. All right, most of the world wants to find this guy. He becomes the most wanted man in the world, And we're looking for him, and looking for him, and we just can't find the guy. He's missing for many, many years. And so when these guys are writing this paper, and I'll explain exactly what they do, the man has not been found. All right, he later was and killed and all that. And we'll get into that. But in this context, Bin Laden is still missing, just vanished. And so what these guys did was they were just talking, apparently, and they were frustrated with the idea that, you know what, we are not thinking intelligently or scientifically or methodically about how to find this guy, right? It was really our approach, if you don't recall, was simply, I don't know, he's some foreign Middle Eastern guy. He's got to be hiding in a cave. Why a cave? I don't know. It just seems like something that one of these guys would hang out in, I guess. And so we just started blowing up caves, throughout Afghanistan and the Middle East in general, just assuming that eventually we're going to blow up the cave in which Osama bin Laden is hiding. All right, that was the level of our brilliant, military strategy to find this guy. So Agnew and Gillespie are sitting around saying, this is nonsense. How would were we tasked with this job, how would we try to find this guy, right? So this is not that the U.S. government, the military, the Department of Defense, or whatever is asking these guys to do it. This is an exercise for these folks, right? But they're going to try to scientifically find him, and they treat it like a biogeography problem. Okay, and biogeography, we're going to talk about that later on, but it's biology and geography. It's using spatial analysis to understand life on the Earth. Okay, that's the gist of it. I think we'll spend time with that, but really what they're doing here is looking to find him like they would if they're trying to find some, rare species of animal, right? Some endangered species that we don't often, see all over the place. So we want to find it in its natural habitat. How would you go about doing that? They're going to apply that to Bin Laden. Which sounds kind of silly, but it works. And so what they do is they first look at who this guy is or was, I guess, in the context of now. So they just have this list of characteristics. Like he was 6'4", okay? Big guy. That makes your cave dwelling a little awkward in there. So, it's not going to be some tiny little thing. The guy's going to want to have some room. And keep in mind, too, they're writing this, whenever they start this, Bin Laden has been missing for like 5, 6, maybe 7 years when they actually started. Okay? So, to be just crammed in this tiny little cave somewhere in Afghanistan, that's not going to work, especially for a guy this tall. Myself, I could hide in a cave for years because I'm not this tall, but this guy, no. And if that weren't enough, he also required dialysis. Okay, his kidneys were shot or whatever. Needed this machine to keep him alive. So that was, a piece of complex medical equipment that is going to require electricity, right? Something that a lot of caves don't have. You don't find a lot of wall outlets in these things. So he's going to need to be in some place where there is some kind of electrical grid in a town or a city, right? Or he's going to need to have some kind of generator, which is going to draw a lot of attention. And again, you can't be hiding in a cave and running some, gas or diesel generator. All the fumes would kill you, right? So the cave thing is not looking good. And then some of this other stuff just based on intelligence on the guy, prefers physical protection, but enjoys personal privacy and has these bodyguards and all this stuff. What they come up with is that Bin Laden is going to be hiding in some kind of compound, right? Meaning that there are going to be multiple buildings. There's going to be a wall around the thing. It's going to be in some kind of city, again, where you could be, plugged into stuff. So they're painting this picture of the habitat of this guy, Osama bin Laden, right? They then take his last known location, which was in Tora Bora, Afghanistan. And this was in late 2001. So right after the 9/11 attacks, we intercept some kind of radio transmission or whatever, and we know exactly where Bin Laden is at this exact moment. But by the time we can send the fighter jets out or whatever to the spot, he's gone. Okay, that's the last time we actually knew where he was. Okay, and we would get like, he would send recorded messages and stuff like that. We were hearing from the man of taunting the United States and all that, but nobody ever knew exactly where he was at that exact moment. So they used this, again, it was like October or November of 2001. They used this as a starting point. And the thing, like I said, I think it's published in 09. They're probably starting this, in 2007 or 8 or something like that. It's long since this guy was, last seen here. But they're also treating this like, just like an exercise. Like if they actually worked for the government back in 2001 when this happened, they're trying to show like, this would have been the good way to do it, right? Just trying to show the need for being more scientific with our approaches to this kind of stuff, right? So they know he's not still there, but they're going to use that. They're going to go from here and apply the distance decay theory. And for all this stuff, like, don't worry about it. We're not going to dwell on these exact theories and this stuff, at least not yet. But the general idea is the further you get away from something, the actual likelihood of finding that thing or whatever is going to drop. Like in this case, what it's saying is that if Bin Laden is here in the middle, that red dot, that's Tora Bora, the further you get from Tora Bora, the less likely you're going to find Osama bin Laden. Right? And it's just kind of a logical thing. Like if we apply it to, whatever, a tree frog or a polar bear or what, some kind of animal, like the further you get from that animal's habitat, the less likely you're going to find it. Right? It just makes sense. We don't see penguins just wandering around here in Southern California because we're so far from their habitat. So it's kind of this like, kind of theory here, but it's a starting point, right? So what they're using with this is saying, hey, we're not going to look for the guy, in Antarctica or, even here in California or whatever. There's not a good chance he's going to be here, so we're not going to waste our time. We're going to focus around Afghanistan, around this specific point where we last saw him, right? That's the idea there. They then use this theory of island biogeography to argue that he's not in some tiny little village, some remote thing. He's going to be in a big city. And the way it works with islands and all this stuff is it states that there are less extinction events and stuff like that. There's more diversity, more resources on these bigger islands than these smaller ones. And the same could be applied for humans. If you need some kind of, if you need resources and all that, you're not going to find them necessarily in the tiniest little, rural village or whatever. It's going to be in a bigger city. And therefore, he's going to have more opportunity to survive for a longer time if he's in a more urban area. Okay? Which very counter to what everybody was saying at the time. Again, with this whole, he's in a cave, let's blow up all the caves idea. So using this, they start looking at larger cities around Afghanistan and neighboring Pakistan, and they settle on, based on all this stuff, and again, assuming it's still 2001 or early 2002 when they're doing it, they decide on Parachinar, or however you pronounce it. I assume that's right. City in Pakistan. So that's where they're going to focus their attention. Okay, that's the idea. And so then, once they have an idea of where he most likely is, they actually had a bunch of their undergraduate students, so just geography students, folks like you, listening to this, sat down in the class and started going through satellite imagery. Okay? The kind of stuff you can see on Google Earth, Google Maps. I think this was like declassified government stuff. I forget exactly what the source was, but still, same kind of idea. They're going through all of these satellite photos and they're looking for different structures, these compounds that would fit all of the characteristics, right? Multiple buildings and walls and stuff like that. These students find 3 structures, okay, that fit. So, like structure A, right here, multiple buildings. We've got the walls and trees and stuff like that. It's in an area where it's going to have electricity, right? So this is a possibility. Structure B, same kind of deal, and structure C. Okay, they all fit the criteria. And so once they did this, they wrote up the paper. So like going back to that whole peer review thing we talked about, wrote up their, the problem and the methods and the analysis and findings and all that stuff, submitted it, went through the peer review process, got published. Okay? Now this, of course, was exciting for the media when they heard this. Remember, again, we didn't know where the guy was at this point. So there were stories on the radio and online and all that of like, UCLA geographers find Bin Laden, not really JK or, whatever. And so it was just a fun little thing, a little story to make everybody go like, well, isn't that sweet? And the whole deal with the article, I think Tom Gillespie was interviewed on this thing, was saying like, look, I want to stress, we didn't actually find him. We're trying to prove a point, trying to show a method and all that, right? They're being very clear about this stuff. Again, it's one of those, wouldn't it be nice had we done something like this back in 2001, right? But nobody really picked up on that. And then with the military was asked, like the Department of Defense was asked for comment on this, like, what do you think? Do you think he could be there? And all that stuff. And the military said, like, yes, this is very cute, UCLA, but we got this under control. Okay? And again, too, I want to stress that Gillespie and Agnew, the article itself is saying he's not here currently, right? Like he probably was back in 2002, but there's no way he's still here in 2009 or whatever. He wouldn't stay right here in the spot, so the likelihood of him being there, not that good, right? And then the military just says, okay, cute, whatever. But here's the crazy thing. Here's the mind-blowing thing, is that shortly after this, like a few weeks after the story breaks and this thing is published and all of that, like we don't have full confirmation, or if we do, I don't know where to track this stuff down, but there are multiple drone strikes in Prachinar, right? After this stuff. And while I cannot confirm that these 3 structures were blown up, it looks like these 3 structures were blown up, right? That's our military strategy right there. We say, okay, very cute. And then we say, you know what, just to be safe, just so we don't look like dummies, let's blow this stuff up. Even though it was quite obvious that he wasn't there, or what you could do is maybe go up and like knock on the door and all that. Still, this stuff gets attacked, which, makes you wonder why people get so frustrated with the United States, right? When we pull stuff like this, it also should make you think. It should make you pause as you're, going through and doing your own college work and all that. Think about how your research could be used in the future, right? Like I can just imagine if I were an undergraduate student in this class and my professor is saying like, okay, we're going to work on something, and we can get an actual publication out of it and all that. Like that would have been exciting stuff. And not once would I think that my work, like if I found, say structure 3 here and I'm like, ooh, look, this will work. And I'm contributing. And then to realize that my doing that could have led to the death of innocent people who were living here, when we decided to blow it up. It's terrifying, right? And all I can say to that is, I promised to you in this class, I will not make you do anything that will lead to the death of innocent people, right? That's all on you if you wind up doing it, but we won't be doing that. It's terrifying and amazing and all that, but that's just what happens here. And then some time goes on, and then Obama shows up on TV and says how, yep, we got him. And yes, Osama bin Laden has been found and killed. Amazing. Amazing. Finally got him. I don't know, in 2010 or 11 or whenever that was. So a little while after this article is published, right? And of course, like anything important, his hideout made it to Google Maps, which I really love. It's mapped on there, and I love that people took the time to review it. Right when I took this screenshot, over 1,500 reviews, and I also love that it's 3 stars. Like, I don't know what that means. Like, are people reviewing like the hideout was pretty good, but I don't like the guy, so I'm going to give it 3 stars. I don't know. This is how wonderful the internet is right here. But when he's found and caught and killed, the first thing that's mentioned by everybody is, son of a gun. He wasn't hiding out in a cave. He was in a city. He was like hiding in plain sight. And when you look at the thing, my God, it fits all the criteria, right? Multiple buildings and the walls and all that stuff. Now, it's in Abbottabad, another city in Pakistan, further away from Tora Bora. In fact, I think I have, the map right here. So here's initially the study. This is Parachinar here, Abbottabad over here, where he was actually found. So a different city, and I think Gillespie was interviewed again when this happened, and he was saying, like, yeah, this fit our criteria, but again, our whole point was we were doing this as if we were, doing it in 2002, immediately after we had this known location of the guy. But he's like, of course, he's over here, right? Because that's what makes sense. So a lot of people went, huh, son of a gun, who knew? But UCLA geographers knew. People who had, read this work knew, and there's a good chance the CIA and the military and all that knew as well. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Zero Dark 30. You guys remember the role of the geographers in that movie? You don't? Yeah, it's because there are no geographers. That movie's garbage because it totally, misleads. We think that, it's this plucky CIA agent and all this stuff. No, it's kind of a weird coincidence that all that would happen. So it's clear to me that the real heroes here are UCLA geographers. And I don't know if you're paying attention. I don't know if I mentioned where I got my bachelor's degree. It was at UCLA. And are you aware of what I do for? Yeah, I'm a geographer. So while I'm not connected to this study directly, let me just say, you're welcome. You're welcome for being on the team that keeps the world safe, right? And that's the great thing about geography. I'll talk about how we helped defeat Hitler too later on when we get into deserts and desert systems and all that. But honestly, the geographers are always defeating supervillains and stuff like that. We never get credit for it. And it's mainly, we don't need the credit. We don't do it for the accolades. We do it, so you can sleep well at night. So, you're welcome. Let me just say that. But also, what this shows, too, what's great about this is that, and honestly, whether or not this did, in fact, lead to the capture of Bin Laden or whatever, what I love about it is just how simple a study it is, in the sense that they didn't need crazy technology to do it. It wasn't something that required, years and years and millions of dollars and all that stuff. It was just this simple, logical exercise of, let's think spatially, let's analyze what we know, let's gather more data so we can, process that, think spatially, turn that into some useful information, and they did it, right? It just goes to show you the power of thinking spatially is incredible. And you don't need to have, state of the art equipment and all that stuff. You just need to have that brain that's able to think about this stuff, right? And that's not also to say that you have to be born with it or what. It's a training thing. We can all learn to think this way. We can all learn to apply things like that distance decay theory and the theory of island biogeography and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot we can do with this maps and using them to think spatially. And so one thing we do and how we really utilize this, it's called GIS. It stands for Geographic Information Systems. And what these guys did with the Bin Laden thing wasn't full on GIS as we kind of tend to think of it, or at least I don't remember if they did any hardcore stuff with it. A lot of it was, combing through remote sensing data. But we can extend this stuff even further, and it's where we map the world in this digital way, and we add different layers of data, right, on top of it. So like this example here, it's showing, vegetation types and soil types and geology and all just these different things, and then kind of bringing them together, overlaying these things, and using that to derive information. Now this, again, it's one of those deals like these ready-made images that we have, mapping dirt and plants might not be as sexy as it sounds, but we can do this with anything, right? With stuff like terrorist data or crime data in general. It can be used for business purposes to get a sense of like, where should I put my business, right? Or, open up this new store or whatever. Like, what would be the smartest place to do it? Where are my customers? Where is competition? Where's, this and that and all that. We can put it all together, map it, and there's some pretty amazing stuff we can do. We'll continue to see some examples of that throughout the class. But GIS is the modern way in which we do this stuff. And it's unbelievably powerful. And if you're interested, we are teaching a wonderful course, Geography 205, in the fall. I don't know if spots are available or not. I think there are a few more last time I checked available there, but it's a class in which you get to learn how to do some of this hardcore mapping stuff. It's one of the few classes offered at this college that will actually prepare you for a job, right? Will give you skills to get hired once you leave. A lot of these other classes we offer, this one included, they're good for, getting you important information in your brain and teaching you about research and stuff like that. But you're not going to get hired because somebody sees, oh, I see you took an intro to physical geography course. That will be useful when you can tell me about, dirt or trees. No, it doesn't quite work that way. But the GIS class, you're going to learn how to make maps, how to actually do this stuff. And there are jobs out there for GIS people to make maps for, again, whatever field, whether it is some kind of research science, ecology, stuff like that, whether it's more cultural stuff, business things, sociology and administration of justice stuff, like, whatever. Those possibilities are out there. So if you're interested, it's, not a big deal. Sign up for the class. It's all online. So it's not going to be that hard for you to make it to the class, but check that out because this is really cool what you can do with it, right? Whether it's finding wanted terrorists or doing more everyday stuff, right? Okay. Pep talk over. That's how to make sure your life is ready for the future. But let's move on now, or actually kind of step back, I guess is a way to think about it, and look at some of this underlying theory and ideas that are, in some cases, thousands of years old, but still incredibly important for those who are going to be successful at using maps. And that's successful in the sense of, like, you're doing actual GIS work, you're doing this hardcore spatial analysis, or if you're simply opening up your phone and you're asking it to tell you how to get from where you are to this place you want to go, right? Like, to use our smartphones and use all this location-based stuff that's in there, we should have this underlying knowledge of how it works in the first place. As I mentioned already, we need to do that just so we don't make horrible mistakes with this stuff. So I'm going to begin your journey into this knowledge with we're going to look at primarily map projections right here, which is just one facet. There's a lot of other stuff to study. And again, if you're interested in that, we've got Geography 205 in the fall. In the spring, we have Geography 201, kind of backwards, but the order of the numbers don't matter there. But 201 gets into more of the low-tech mapping stuff. But those are opportunities for you if you want to go further with this stuff. But for the rest of you, well, for all of you, let's just get into what cartography is, which by definition here is the art and the science of representing the Earth in map form. And a few things here are key. Number one, this idea of representing. It's always important to remember that a map is not reality. Right? It's a representation of reality. It's someone, a cartographer, making specific choices in order to represent the Earth, typically in a way that they feel is, the best way. Most cartographers are trying to do the best possible job they can do to represent the Earth, but it's nonetheless a representation. And that can be key as you work more with this stuff. And then also the fact that it's an art and a science. That's another key concept here. It's art because we are trying to visually convey information, and that requires a certain amount of graphic design and attention to aesthetic detail and all that. But at the same time, it's a science because stuff has to be in the right place. Right? Like there have been plenty of times where I've been mapping something, and man, it would just look so much better if this river were over on the other side of the map, or the name of the river were shorter, or could change it or whatever. But we can't do that, right? Doesn't matter how it might look better if we changed it. We can't change it because we're trying to maintain that very accurate representation of the Earth. So we've got to be scientifically accurate, but we also have to make sure it's an attractive visual thing. So that's what I mean by art and science. So that last lecture with geodesy and all of that, we're talking about the Earth, but we're talking about it, again, it's still as a representation, getting into the geoid and latitude and longitude and all that. These are ways in which humans have tried to make sense and model the actual Earth itself. So it's another form of a representation. And really what we were doing is we were looking at the Earth as a globe, which is just like a nice little neat shrunken version of the Earth itself. All right, that's the idea there. So you can see with this image here, what a globe is we've taken the Earth, we shrink it down to a manageable size, and then we slap on the latitude and longitude lines, and we write names of stuff on the thing, right? So we're still representing the Earth in that way, but that's what we've been discussing, not a map in that true sense of the term that we'll be getting into here. Okay? And were we in an actual classroom, we'd talk about this stuff, like what's cool about a globe, what's wrong with it, and all that. Really, the best thing about a globe is they're just sexy as hell. I mean, and this one, look, someday, this is going to be in my house, something like this, with just the gold looks like there's a light down at the bottom, and everything that's sexy, right? There's no other way of discussing that, or phrasing it, or whatever. It's just a sexy thing. For you to be standing next to something like this, you just look smarter, no matter what. And so globes they just look cool. Right? That's the best thing about them. And I mean, I use them. I got a few around the house. I use them with the kids when we're talking about stuff in the news or whatever, trying to show them where things are. So they can be useful in that way. Oh man, too. And what's really sad right now is that like we're not on campus, so you can't go into our geography lab. We got this old globe. It lights up. Oh, it's fantastic. I've saved it for so long. I mean, I don't know if that I don't think that one says Soviet Union on it. It's not the most up to date thing though, definitely. But we will never get rid of it because you can plug it in and you touch the side of it, and the whole Earth starts glowing. Right? Sexy as hell. So that's that. Now another benefit is that there's no distortion here in the sense that everything is where it should be. It's the right size in relation to other things. It's a shrunken version of the Earth, and therefore it's an accurate version of the Earth. The one problem is that the scale isn't always that useful. Like if you have a globe, good luck finding, Lancaster on it, let alone, Rosamond or Lake LA or Quartz Hill or whatever. We'll have, Los Angeles, San Francisco, maybe a few more coastal locations because they're easy to write on the globe, but you're not going to see a lot of small communities on that thing. You can't use it for driving directions or, local geography stuff. So that's an issue. Another problem is when you're looking at a globe, you see less than 50% of the world at any given time. Okay? And that can be quite frustrating. In fact, going back to like being in class and lab activities and stuff like that, when I have students, I love to torture you students by having you use globes to find stuff on there, and you realize what a pain it is when you need to find stuff in the southern hemisphere because of the tilt of the globe. We'll talk about that tilt in the next lecture. But you're holding it up and you're moving it around, and it can be quite awkward. And that's because we can only see this, like 48% of the Earth in a really, useful way, no matter how we spin the thing. And this is really where these two things are where a map is useful. A, we can change the scale of the map, something that unfortunately we don't have time to talk about in this class, but also a map allows us to look orthographically at the world, which is a fancy way of saying we can see the entire world as if we are floating up in space and looking down, and our gaze, our eyes, our line of sight, it hits the surface of the Earth at a perpendicular angle. Okay? So orthographic is a fancy way of saying like perpendicular or a 90-degree angle. It's as if we are directly above the place. But what's even cooler is, sure, we could still do that in a plane or a, space station or whatever. Satellites are able to do that, take images of the Earth. We can still look at the Earth in this orthographic way, but we can only do it for a specific area at any given time. A map allows us, like this map right here, it allows us to see the entire world orthographically all at once. And so maybe that didn't just blow your mind. You're probably not going like, whoa, this changes my life. But that's pretty amazing just from the standpoint of this is the only way in which you can do it. We take it for granted because we're so used to seeing the world in this way, whether it's been in textbooks or in a classroom itself or on the web or whatever. We really take it for granted that we are able to do this. But we weren't always able to do it, and it took some real thinking to be able to pull that off. And we'll see how that works. So a map, it's this representation of reality, much like a globe is. So there's no real difference there. And don't worry about the whole points, lines, polygons, that kind of stuff. And again, it's just to remind you that this stuff, it's make-believe. Really, that's a lot of it. We are representing stuff. It is a work of art. It's a scientifically informed work of art, but it can also become a work of fiction, as we get further and further from that scientific reality, right? And this image is from GIS software, that very stuff you could learn to use in the Geography 205 class, where I teach you guys how to bring stuff in, pull stuff out, manipulate things, and you actually have control over the maps themselves, right? That's the idea here. So it's still, it's not that different from a globe in the sense that it's still that representation of reality. But the real key thing here when we're talking about maps is we're talking about a flat surface. Okay? But our Earth, it's not flat. It's a geoid. It's round-ish, right? And when you think about it, if you think about it for more than, a second, you realize that it's not that simple to take something that's round, whether it's perfectly round or geoidal in nature, and then make it completely flat. Okay? What we typically do, the analogy that's used, is to peel an orange. And that's really great because an orange, it is kind of geoidal in the sense that it's not a perfect sphere. It's kind of lumpy in some places, not quite, that perfect Greek sphere idea. But if you take an orange, in fact, go ahead and do this. Go to the store. Just go ahead. Make sure you have a mask on, safety first. But just go and just grab an orange from the produce area and start peeling it, right? And if anybody asks you what you're doing, just say, "Hey, geography," and they'll back off. I'm sure that'll okay. Pay for an orange if you're really going to do this, or don't do it. Or you know what? I bet there are people on YouTube who are nerdy enough to do this in a video, so you don't have to do it. You don't have to go through the agony of eating fruit. Look, the point is, right? The point is not that you need to actually do it, but it's the idea that if you were to peel an orange, yeah, you can peel it. You can peel it into one continuous surface, right? That was always the thing. I don't know. Do you guys do that? Like in third grade or whatever, where if you had that one guy at the lunch table who could have that continuous orange peel, he was like a god. I went to school a long time ago. Maybe that's different for you guys with your, smartphones and all that, but that's how we had fun, by God, at lunchtime. So that, we can do that. And you can lay that peel flat, but when you look at it, that peel definitely does not look like the original orange, right? And what you can do even further, like with this image here, is go ahead and draw the continents or even just shapes in general on that orange. And as you peel it, you'll see those shapes that looked good on the orange, they're destroyed once you peel it, right? So this whole idea of peeling a globe doesn't quite work. This is effectively the best you could do. If you took the globe and just peeled it and laid it flat, you're going to get a map that looks like this. And I'm sorry, that's a garbage map, right? Just look at that. That is complete garbage. As an American, this angers me. I don't know about you. Look at that. Outrageous. I don't care if, Russia is torn up, but us, outrageous. And really, you've never seen a map like this, right? Every now and then people they get a little creative with graphic design and they do this stuff where they've invented new map projections. We'll get into what that is in a moment. You may have seen stuff kind of like this, but it's always garbage, right? This is terrible. What we're used to seeing is something like this, right? Now that's a map, by God, because it's all connected. It makes sense. There aren't lines running through here. There aren't entire continents ripped into 3 or 4 different chunks, right? That's what a map looks like. But this is what we would call a projected globe or a map projection. Okay, so it's different. It's a different process from this whole peeling thing. A map projection is a very scientific way of taking a round surface and making it flat. Okay, so I have with this definition here a systematic reproduction. Systematic, we used that with science before, having a system, having a method in place. We're not just playing around doing whatever, thinking about how it makes us feel. We're following specific steps. And it's how we take the surface of the Earth, the globe, and we're also going to transfer the graticule, this idea of latitude and longitude, or that geographic grid, how we're going to take that from this round initial surface and make it flat. Okay, so that's all a map projection is. But here's the deal, and here's why this is important to realize, is that anytime we do this, we're going to introduce distortion. Okay, and distortion is our catch-all term that means error. It's where we've gone in and we've stretched stuff out. So things are bigger than they might be, or we've shrunk other things. So they're smaller. We've torn things and then filled in the gaps later on. So size and shape and direction and distance and all that stuff can be totally wrong on a map. And of course, we don't realize that. The whole idea with a map, like if you had something like this, you might question it more, right? Just because it looks like there's some issues in here. But a properly projected map, we've kind of been trained just over years of using them and not questioning how they came to be. We've kind of been trained to not question this stuff. Now, this map, it's good for some stuff, but also errors galore. Like you'll get to the point, hopefully after this, you'll be able to look at this stuff and you'll be able to see it and go, oh yeah, oh God, yeah, that's wrong. And this is wrong. Like this is good, but this is bad. That's what you should do. And also be aware, every single map is like this. There is no one perfect map projection. There's no best map projection. Every map is wrong in some way. Every map has an error to a certain extent in at least some part of it, if not throughout the whole thing, and we need to be aware of that. It doesn't mean that all maps are garbage and we shouldn't use them or whatever, but it does mean that we got to be careful. We got to know what it is we're looking at, what we're seeing, and how that does connect with reality. Okay, that's the idea. And so the reason why we're getting into this, reason why I'm teaching you guys this stuff, why I'm taking a whole lecture time to talk about it. Well, not the whole lecture. I had to talk about how UCLA saved the world and fighting bad guys. But also why I'm spending half a lecture period on this stuff is because it is important. We use maps more than we realize, but for most of us, we don't actually question them. We don't understand how they came to be, and that's what you need, right? We need to be aware of this process. Here's another way of looking at distortion, right? Where we've got, this would be like a strip of a map that we would be used to seeing. It looks like, I'm pretty sure, what we're looking at, I think that's Florida right here in Central America. I think that's what we're seeing. But what reality is, again, if we were to peel that globe, it would initially start like this, and it would be stretched out and pulled apart, and then so certain areas are filled in, right? So it's definitely not going to look like that much better representation of reality because of this distortion. And we'll get into why we still use these things and why maps are still, in most cases, superior to a globe, and so why you'd want to use a map. But still, let's keep this whole idea of distortion in mind. Now, one problem, however, with distortion is the idea, like I could say, look at a map, I can say stuff like, oh my God, look at South America. Doesn't that look terrible? Or, this country or this continent or whatever, doesn't that look funky? But for most of us, we don't know what Australia or Greenland or whatever is supposed to really look like normally. Like we have a general sense of what it looks like. But if I say like, oh my God, look at that, how stupid, you would look at me like I was stupid because it wouldn't click, right? So that's another thing geographers and cartographers have done, is trying to get this distortion idea to make sense to non-geographers. Now, this is a classic example here. This is from Arthur Robinson, who is seen as the father of modern cartography. He's an important American cartographer, led to a lot of conventions and rules and stuff that we just use, we treat as gospel today. So he's a great guy. This is from his kind of main textbook. It's the thing I learned when I was learning this cartography stuff. Read through this, and you get to the chapter, the section on map projections and distortion, and he put together this image. And so what we have these three different map projections in here. And with the first one, I think this is the Molvita projection to start with, he draws this bald blue man, right? And the bald blue man is there to be, that's normal, as normal as a bald blue man can be, right? So he draws it. The idea is that's the reality. That's perfection right there. Now this bald blue man, once we take that and then we reproject it into, say, this Mercator projection, what you see is distortion. He starts to change, right? The top of his head swells up and gets bigger. His chin juts out, and the neck gets thicker, and all of that stuff. So clearly, that's wrong. And then it's reprojected again, and the head flattens out, and so on. And so what Robinson is trying to show here is that, yeah, when we project or reproject stuff, you're going to have this distortion. Okay, that's the idea. The problem I have with this, well, I like the sentiment. I think it works. I'm sorry. The blue bald man never really looks normal to begin with, right? So it's kind of hard to say like, oh yeah, that's a good bald blue man and that's a bad bald blue man. So what I did was I decided let's take the same idea, but let's update it a little bit, right? So I took this face. Oh, I mean, just look at that perfection right here. Normally I get very uncomfortable if I'm actually in a classroom talking about this in front of students because it's my head, my, weird bald blue head up in the front of the classroom next to this specimen of perfection. And so you guys are instantly comparing the two. What I like about this online format is that you got me talking and you're looking at that. Yeah, but what I did, so I took this gorgeous, gorgeous man, and I put him into the earth, right? Which is, I think, kind of a metaphor for how I feel. But I mean, how can you not love this guy, right? Dream boat. So yeah, I put him in the earth. How was I able to do it? Well, I know GIS. I've successfully completed Geography 205. So just something to think about as you're signing up for classes. So yeah, I put them in here. And so the idea is what I'll do as I go through. I'm going to start introducing these map projections. And when I show them, I'll show you the map itself, but I'll show you what happens to his face, right? When we start to project this stuff. Because it's hard for you to say like, oh yeah, Greenland looks funny in this case. But you can definitely tell when Brad Pitt does not look right. Right? It's very clear. So we'll use his head to help us figure this stuff out. All right, that's the goal. Now, as I said, there's no one good map projection or one best map projection or perfect or whatever. We got hundreds of these things, if not thousands. I don't know exactly how many exist, but there are a lot. And you can see here are just three randomly selected ones that show the Earth in very different ways. Okay? Not a single one of these is perfect, but they can be good for some things and bad for other stuff, right? What we want to do is understand how these map projections work so we can pick the right map for whatever job it is we're trying to do, right? That's what we're going to get in here. So there's not a single one that's perfect, but all of them are great if we know their limitations and we know when to use them and when not to use them. Right? So that's what we're going to go through. Now, with map projections, what I'm going to do in the interest of time here is I'm going to quickly go through this whole decision stuff. I'm not going to be teaching this as if you are future cartographers, even though you guys really should be, because it's quite rewarding to do it. Not only can you get paid to do it, but there's just something great about making a map, about taking this geographic information and turning it into something completely new, and the ability to convey information quickly with this stuff. And if you're interested, like if you have an interest in looking at this, chat with me, because that's another thing I've done. I've done professional cartography work. I have stuff in books and journals and all that stuff. It's a great career field and fun to do, but you got to know what you're getting into. So feel free to chat with me if you're interested in this stuff. But that said, we're going to kind of move through this whole surface and orientation and light source stuff. I'll talk about it in a very quick manner, which is also code. I'm not going to test you on this stuff in this way, but we'll then spend some time talking about what the end result is, the actual map projections themselves. And even though I'm skipping through this and not going to talk about it in that much detail, the whole reason why we're doing this too, to kind of reiterate, is the idea that whether you're going to be a cartographer or not, if you're just going to use a map of some kind at some point in time, which we all will, whether we're aware of it or not. I've asked students in my lab class about how do they use geography in their daily lives, and a lot of them say, like, I don't know, I don't think I do. And the reality is that no, if you do, it's there. You just don't think of it as geography, right? Same thing with cartography here. You might not think of yourself as really relying on maps. You're in the 21st century and when you have your phone doing stuff, but your phone is doing geography and you still need to be interpreting it, right? Or the images and stuff you see on news sites or social media or whatever, that's geography as well. There are plenty of bad maps. And that's something, again, this is what I love, is when I teach these things, I always get excited about stuff I'm talking about in other classes. And believe me, I do it in the other classes as well. I talk about all the cool stuff I talk about in here. But in Geography 105, my cultural geography class, we get into that other side of how, like, we see maps that show up online and I point out how they're horribly wrong or how they're lying or how we can interpret them and stuff like that. That's why we need to learn it. It's this whole idea of, as being a map user, you need to carefully and critically think about the maps that you're using or the app that you're using, whatever it is that you're using, right? Again, trying not to drive to Croatia. That's our goal. All right. This first thing with projection surfaces, it's the idea, and it goes back to the old time, the original way in which we projected a globe onto a flat sheet of paper, right? So this planar, conical, cylindrical, it's just different sheets of paper, effectively, that could be used. And so it's the idea, like this planar, don't worry about it, like the conical, this will maybe make some more sense. We would take a sheet of paper and wrap it around a globe. And so the projection, it's actually using like a candle inside the thing and tracing the shadows. There's a primitive way of doing it in the past. Today we have, mathematical models and computer stuff to take care of that. But this gets back to the origins of the stuff. So depending on the sheet of paper we're going to use, right, whether it's, I guess going back here, just like a flat sheet of paper that touches one area, or a cone, or a cylinder, or whatever, that's going to make a very different map, right? Like if I use a cylindrical sheet of paper, if I just wrap it around like this example here, versus using the cone, depending on which surface I choose, it will lead to a different map, a different end result, right? But these are just different ways in which we're trying to get that round thing, place it onto a flat sheet of paper. Orientation is where it depends on how we set up that sheet of paper, right? So like with this cylindrical thing back here, it's oriented in a specific way, but we can turn it. There's no rule that says we have to do this way, right? So orientation is how do we set up that sheet of paper. And then this concept, this is actually a useful concept here. This point or line of tangency is that point or line where that surface is actually making contact with the globe itself, where they touch. And we'll see, like here, this example, it's showing different types of orientation. Don't worry, I'm not going to test you on normal versus transverse or whatever. But that red line is showing that line of tangency, or what we sometimes call a standard line. So it's where these things actually touch. And that's useful because where the surface touches the globe, that's where we have no distortion. Okay, so meaning everything in that spot along that line, go back here, so along this red line, that's all going to be accurate, beautiful map information. Right? Same thing right here. Accurate, beautiful map information. But the further we get from that line of tangency, the more distortion is going to be introduced. So this is one good thing, one useful thing to think about as you're learning about maps and figuring out which one to use for whatever it is you're going to do. So where is that standard line or that line of tangency? Because if I'm studying It's like with this type of cylindrical projection, that standard line is going to be around the equator. So if I'm looking at stuff around the equator, fantastic. This would be a good map to use, right? That has that standard line along the equator. But if I'm studying something at the North Pole, about as far away from the equator as I can possibly get, it'd be a terrible map because there's all this distortion in there, right? It's going to be wrong in the area where I want to study it. Whereas this transverse orientation, that line runs actually right through the North Pole in this case, that could be a perfect map to use. You follow? So it's, again, we want to think about where is this distortion? If every map has distortion, well, let's think about what it is I'm trying to map and what I'm trying to, get out of it. What kind of spatial analysis am I trying to do? And then based on that, I'll pick the right stuff, right? That's why we need to understand this. Let's see, secant, don't worry about that. Light source, don't worry about that. You're not going to be putting candles in a globe, so we can skip it. But here's the deal. All of these things, depending on where you put your lights and the orientation and the surface use and all that, it's going to lead to a very specific map projection, right? And so, as I said, all these map projections are flawed. They're all wrong in some way. They all have error in a specific way, but they're also useful in other ways. They maintain certain things. So now this is the stuff that you really need to be aware of. This is where, as non-cartographer map users, this is what we should be aware of. Okay? These major and minor properties of maps, right, that exist on maps. So these are all referring to things that exist in reality, are true in reality, or have some basis in reality, and how they're maintained on a map itself. Okay? So these minor ones, it's pretty obvious. Distance and direction. It basically means if a map maintains that property of distance, it means that if you measure between point A and point B, the distance is correct, right? Same thing with direction. If you draw a line from point A to point B, and you measure it with like a compass and you're looking at cardinal direction and all that stuff, if it's, the direction is southwest on the map, in reality, it's also southwest. And that may sound like, well, of course, right? But no, not every map allows you to do that. You could, draw these lines and measure this stuff, and you could get horribly wrong information from the map precisely because it's not maintained on the map itself, right? It doesn't maintain distance or direction. These other ones, these major ones, we have much bigger, fancier, scarier words for these, but these are also pretty straightforward. And that's what I'm going to spend most of this time on. Conformity and equivalence. And maps will find they're either going to maintain perfect conformity, but then their equivalence is shot, or they're going to maintain perfect equivalence, but then their conformity is shot, right? So you can't have both. The best you can do is try to meet in the middle, and then both of them are wrong, but it kind of works. We'll get into that, what we call a compromise projection. But yeah, you have to pick. You have to decide. Am I really worried about conformity, or am I worried about equivalence? And then these minor properties also think, do I care about distance? Do I care about direction? Because again, not every map maintains this stuff. Okay? And so that's worth thinking about here and keeping fresh in our minds. So this first major property, conformity, it's a fancy way of saying shape, right? Shape is good. If a map maintains conformity, or is a conformal map, it has the right shape. All the continents and stuff, different countries that are on the map are a proper shape. Okay? And really technically, its angles are maintained, which leads to shape, right? Like, what's a square but 4, right angles, right? That's the idea here. And a clue that you're dealing with a map that maintains conformity is if you look at the graticule, if you look at the lines of latitude and longitude, they should intersect at perfect 90-degree angles, or right angles, right? And that's because in reality they do. And if you look at a globe, it can be kind of funky because it is this round surface. But if you actually measure the individual lines of latitude and longitude and where they meet, you'll see they are intersecting at that perfect perpendicular way. They're all 90-degree angles around there. All right, so if a map also shows every line of longitude and latitude intersecting at 90-degree angles, you know that conformity is correct. You know that's been maintained. You follow shapes are fantastic. Now, the distance idea gets a little funky, and I'm not even going to dwell on it with this, but you get into some kind of weird things with these conformity maps like the Mercator projection that I'll be talking about, where you get kind of this hourglass looking scale bar thing where scale works at a specific point, but as you go further north or south or further away from that line of tangency, distance is going to do some funky stuff. So these, that distance is gone, but as we'll see, direction is actually still maintained with a lot of these things. So that's what conformity we're looking at, angles, primarily shape, being maintained. And in the case of the Mercator projection, what we're going to see is distance can be weird, but direction is maintained. So the Mercator projection, it's named for this guy, Gerardus Mercator, the first guy to take a round surface and make a map that maintains conformity. And it turns out with this maintenance of angles, maintenance of direction, these map projections, these conformal map projections, are really useful for navigation, for traveling, right? Especially navigating at sea, which in the 1500s here, I mean, this is deep into, European exploration and colonization and all of that. And so a lot of this, the ways in which we learn to map the Earth, which we, use for what we think of as good reasons now, a lot of them come from some bad stuff. I mean, this is white folks going out and taking land from brown folks and black folks and all of them. So, the origins are not great. Geography in general, as well as cartography, it's not an innocent discipline. I think I mentioned that a little bit with Humboldt at the beginning of the semester. So it's important to, just be aware of that historical context. So the reason why this shows up at this point in time, most likely because it was important to get more ships leaving Europe and accurately being able to get to these new lands to take more land from people who are already there, right? That's from where this comes. But Mercator was the first guy to figure this out, to crack it. And what's really cool about the Mercator projection is you can draw a line from point A to point B, and that direction is true. So if I do that, if I'm back in the old world and I draw a line from where I am and where I want to go in the new world, go over to the Americas or wherever, so I draw that line and I measure it, and I say, oh, okay, I need to go, west-southwest or whatever it might be. I can point my ship in that direction. I can use my compass to travel in that direction, and sure enough, I'm going to get to my destination, right? And I'm going to have more, information, better amount of precision and scale and all that than I would have on a globe. So that's the usefulness of the map. And then, I can actually, get to where I want to go. No other map could do that prior to this time. And still to this day, there are plenty of maps where you just can't do that. All right, so Mercator's map, the whole, reason for it, the usefulness of it, it has to do with navigation. That's what it's good for. Now, it's also got plenty of problems, right? Because every map is going to have distortion some way. So shape is good, but size, and that's what we mean by equivalence, we'll talk about that next, but size is garbage. The further you get from the line of tangency, which is in the Mercator projection, is along the equator. It's one of those cylindrical projections that touches the equator. The further you get from that line, size just falls apart. And because of that, and that's why scale gets kind of weird here, because of that, it shows the proper direction between 2 points, but it doesn't necessarily show the shortest distance between those 2 points, right? Like we tend to think, people love to say, those math people love to say, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Just bullshit. If you're dealing with maps, right? That's not true. That works in a mathematical vacuum, but in something, as we'll see, like with the Mercator projection, that is not the case at all. Right? A straight line between 2 points quite often shows the longer way to get to those 2 points. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Right? But it's important to keep in mind what it's good for, what it's not good for. Okay, so here is what I did. Again, I can do this because I've successfully completed Geography 205, offered in the fall. Going to be exciting. What I've done here is I've taken this composite satellite image of the Earth, and I just projected it using the Mercator projection. Okay, pretty effortless when you know what to do. That's the great thing, is in the olden days, you had to get your candle out in your globe and you do hard work. Now you just, hit a few things in the computer and it does all the hard work for you, right? It's pretty effortless to do. But this is the Mercator projection. Now, we don't normally, you've seen this projection in textbooks and classrooms and all that stuff online in the past. You've never seen it like this, most likely, because typically what we do is we crop it, right? And it gets back to that idea of distortion and size and all that. Like, we get rid of Antarctica down here because this is garbage. And you can see how pixelated it gets down here. It's because it's stretched so much, so dramatically. So we crop it, and you see a little bit of Antarctica kind of peeking up from the bottom of the world. And that kind of distorts how we think about Antarctica, because it's like this little, cap on the southern end of the planet. But this looks like it's a weird strip of land, right? So that's one weird thing about going from a globe to a map. But we do it in this way. Now, a few things here to help with this distortion. Going back to it as the geoid, I just copy and pasted these little yellow circles on here. So all the same size, shape, and all that. And then I did it again, project it with the Mercator projection. And so you can see these start out as identical. They get dramatically tweaked. And the way I did it too helps to explain why some of these shapes get weird. It's because I didn't account for the curvature of the Earth. But don't worry about the shapes are still maintained in the map. But the size, that's the key thing here, right? But again, yellow circles, who cares? Let's go back to this guy. So here's how he should look, right? Here's the Mercator projection right here. Not so pretty now, are you? No, look at that troll-looking thing. That chin comes out, the head just continues on. And really when you look at it, the eyes, not too bad, and that's because of that standard line in here. So his eyes are close to the equator, but as you get further and further from that, everything stretches out. And we can also further, again, we can put the continents on top of this stuff, so you can get a sense. Like, you might not know what Greenland should look like, but you know that if his head is doing all sorts of weird stuff up here, Greenland's not looking so good, right? Up here around his eyes, this stuff looks okay. So, you might not, again, know what, Peru or Ecuador are supposed to look like. But you can see here, okay, his eyes look okay. That's not a total deal breaker. So Peru is going to look okay, right? The Congo is going to look okay. And, Indonesia and so on. Although, again, as we get further, it's kind of weird. His ear is not looking so good. It should be better in there. Like, it's not perfect. All right, I'm doing what I can. All right, so that's the idea. Does that make sense? Hopefully, you can see this distortion. And normally, too, in class, I would linger on this. So now my face looks a lot better compared to this guy. But I'm going to move on because you're looking at this troll face and you're hearing my voice. I don't like that correlation. So moving on, let's get into that whole distance and direction thing. Okay? So yeah, we know that size is screwed up, even though shape is good. But now, what we're looking at here, this example from one, like every textbook where the graphics department does this kind of stuff. This is showing from Portland, Oregon, over here to Cairo, Egypt. if we were to use a Mercator projection, we could draw a straight line from Portland to Cairo or vice versa. And if we had an airplane, we could, point it in that compass direction, follow that line, and sure enough, if we leave Portland at that heading, we're going to wind up in Cairo. The problem is we'd be going the long way to do that. All right? The shortest distance is actually right here. If we go up into Canada and across Greenland, and then down here, through Europe and into Cairo, that's the shortest distance. Now that looks stupid if you look at the Mercator projection, but it's all because, remember, Greenland ain't that big, right? All this distortion is taking place. So that's screwing up this idea of distance. Even though direction's good, distance is screwed up here. Okay? And a way to think about it too, and we'll get into these maps that maintain equivalence, but Greenland and Mexico, they're the same size in reality. Like if you look at a globe, Greenland and Mexico are effectively the same size there. So when you see a map, the first thing to do is look at Greenland and then look at Mexico, as well as look at these latitude and longitude lines. And sure enough, lat long, 90-degree angles throughout here. So it's maintaining conformity. And Mexico and Greenland, very different sizes. So size is all screwed up, right? But that's why. If you were to, this is a typical classroom exercise, you hold a piece of string, and then measure from something like Portland to Cairo, going along what we call a great circle route. It's just the shortest distance on a round surface is what that means. You find that sure enough, that would in fact be the shortest way to get there. Now this wasn't a problem if you were, in the 1500s, 1600s, you're sailing from Europe over here. You don't have a lot of options, right? You can't easily sail up through Greenland, travel through the Arctic or through the Antarctic or whatever. So it doesn't really matter. But today, with air travel and all that stuff, it's worth thinking about. So it's still good for navigation, but we just need to be aware of some of its limitations, and maybe use another map, use a series of maps as we're plotting our course. Right? That's the idea with this thing. Okay, so a Mercator projection. It's a good example of a map that maintains conformity, but it also ain't got no equivalence, right? Which is our other major property, which simply means size is correct, okay? Sizes are going to be the same throughout. When you look at a map that maintains equivalence, Mexico and Greenland are going to be the same size. Okay? We also call these equal area projections, meaning that areas throughout the globe are equal to one another. So something in reality that's the same size as something else, in reality on the Earth itself, it's going to look like that. It's going to maintain that same relationship on one of these maps that maintains equivalence. Okay? But again, you can't have it both ways. So size is great, but now shape, angle, that's going to be screwed up. So if we're looking at these maps, these equal area maps, or these maps that maintain equivalence, we're not going to see the latitude and longitude lines crossing at perfect 90-degree angles, at least not consistently. Maybe, and quite often what we'll say, I think the example we have, the prime meridian and the equator will do that. Everything else is going to be off of 90, either a little less or a little more, whatever. Again, the further you get from that standard line, right? That's the idea. So with this too, you want to think about, what does that mean exactly? So shape is screwed up, but size is correct. This is an example from another map textbook right here. All of these shapes are different, but their area, the size of them in terms of square meters here, are the same, right? Again, that's kind of vague. I like to do stuff like this, where I just took Peru. This is what Peru is supposed to look like. That's a sexy Peru. This is a squished Peru. This is a stretched out one. But if you were to measure the actual area, it's all the same. All right. So the shape, these are funky looking Perus, but maybe I don't care what Peru looks like. And a good example of this would be, let's say I'm studying remaining forest cover, on the planet, right? Well, and we'll talk about that as we get into climates and climate change. Forests are important. We'll also get into the biogeography stuff at the end. Why something like the Amazon, it's just so cool. We want to maintain it, for no other selfish reason, we want to have air to breathe and maintain climate regimes and stuff like that. It's just a cool place. All right, so maybe we want to map and see, where is this deforestation happening? Where do we have these remaining forests, and how much remaining forest do we have, right? In terms of square miles or square kilometers or acres or hectares or whatever unit of aerial measurement, right? I don't care what the shape of the Amazon is, right? Or, the Congo or the, forests and stuff in Borneo and Southeast Asia and Malaysia and all of that. I don't care about the shape. That doesn't matter what the boundary shape is. I want to know how many square miles am I dealing with, right? That's what I'm interested in. And that's where one of these equal area map projections would be useful, right? Like the sinusoidal here. It's kind of a weird looking one. It's kind of cool looking too, just because it's so pointy. But you can look at it. Lat long in this case. Okay, so it's the prime meridian. It, goes along here. Anything that crosses at any parallel, that's going to be at 90 degrees. But then as you get further from that angle changes until we get over here. And so that angle is way less than 90, right? Say right there. So that's a clue. But then again, Greenland, Mexico, the same size. Shape, Greenland's looking kind of funky there. But again, we don't care. Maybe we're looking at ice, right? We want to look at glacial ice, around the Earth. We're measuring that stuff. I don't care what the shape of a glacier is. I want to know how much ice is there. So if I want to use a map to measure this stuff all around the globe, up here in the Arctic, down here in the Antarctic, other glaciers around the globe and other key locations, I use an equal area projection when it maintains equivalence, and I'm going to get a correct answer. If we think back to the Mercator projection and how big Greenland is, if I measure the ice, because the poles are gigantic, it's going to look like we have tons of glacial ice and that we're fine and we don't need to worry about warming temperatures or whatever, right? It's going to be horribly wrong. My information will be false, but I won't know that because I'm not thinking about maps and their limitations and projections and distortion and all that stuff, right? So an equal area map is going to be useful when we actually need to measure area around the globe. We're not traveling from point A to point B. We're getting a sense of what's there and how much of it is there. All right? Hopefully that makes sense. Here are those circles again. You can see we don't have those blown out sizes anymore. And of course, here's Brad Pitt's face. And it's not quite as freakish like the Mercator version. That freaks you out. This one's pointy. He's not a good looking guy at all with that pointy head and chin and all that. But still, at least the size of his head isn't freakish, right? Like the shape isn't that great, but the size isn't horribly, horribly freakish. That's what we're getting at. Now, finally, with these projections, we have what we call a compromise projection, which means we're going to compromise between equivalence and conformality. Maybe we don't need to navigate. We're not measuring glacial ice. All we want to do is we want to have a good looking map. That's what a compromise projection is. Triple projection is a great example of a compromise projection. This is one that National Geographic likes to use. It's a good looking map, right? And now it's not perfect. There are issues in terms of size. There are issues in terms of shape. But if I just simply need a map for, say, reference, I'm in a class and I'm talking about different parts of the world and I just need to point out this stuff, right? If we just need a good reference point, that's what a compromise map projection is useful for. And that's what we'll see with a lot of maps that are online that websites are used to, to display information. They'll use these attractive looking compromise projections, but we need to keep in mind that we cannot accurately take aerial measurements from these things. We cannot accurately use these for navigation purposes or whatever, because there's error throughout. right? This thing has the most error in the sense that everything is wrong, but at the same time, aesthetically, it looks pretty good because we're not having, one thing perfect and the other thing extremely wrong, but everything is just kind of wrong. It looks good, but it's only useful for, just conveying basic information, right? So here's the circles, but, more importantly, here's this guy. Now look, this doesn't look that bad right here, but it is. There's error throughout here. We need to be aware of that, but it's not a deal breaker, right? Like you see this guy, he's not really Brad Pitt, or if you like met him in real life and you realize that a lot of the reason why he looks so good is because of Hollywood magic and all that, you'd see this, you'd be like, well, it's kind of a disappointment, but I'm not going to complain, right? That's the general idea. So that's what a compromise projection is all about. Okay, so the main idea here with this whole map projection thing is that the globe is the only accurate representation of size, shape, distance, and direction all at the same time. Okay, that's what a globe maintains because it's simply the Earth shrunken down. But of course, we have all these issues with a globe. It's not always the perfect tool for the job, so we want to use a map, right, at a specific scale, and we also want to make sure that we're using a specific projection because let's say we don't care about size, but we do care about shape or whatever. We are aware, okay, this map projection will be perfect for what it is I need to do. It's not perfect for everything, but for what I'm trying to do right now, that's going to work, right? That's the idea. That's what I want you guys to take from this idea of map projections and how to use them and why to be aware of them. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, what I would normally do here is also talk about with science, like it's okay to fail. I like to show this one time when I was experimenting, trying to figure out how to put this guy's face into the globe and just playing around with it. I see what I did wrong here, but still I picked this picture because my God. I mean, do you see this right here? Look at that. I'm not allowed to leave the house looking like that. My wife won't let me. At all. On me, it looks sleazy and sad and creepy. This guy can pull it off. Dreamboat, right? So that's why I picked this picture. And then I did it and I projected it. And this is what I got. This is horribly wrong. But it is a case, again, when I'm in a classroom, that last image I want you guys to have is my face and then, this freak right here. But again, not doing it, so let's move on. All right, that's it for maps. Next time, we're going to get into the sun, seasonality, our connection between the sun and the earth. Going to answer a lot of questions I know as you guys already have about solstices and equinoxes and some of the homework questions and study guide stuff and all that. I'll be recording that shortly, putting it up on Canvas, so just sit tight for that. And then you'll have all the information you need for that first exam. All right, so we are moving through here, gaining incredible knowledge about geography. So just keep working through this stuff, keep reading, keep studying, chatting with each other. And until next time, geographers, have a lovely, lovely day.